You know, when you're trying to learn something new in math, like when you're tackling a new topic,
Yeah.
there's always a sort of question that pops up, like, should I just jump in and figure out how to do it? Like, what are the steps? What's the procedure?
Right.
Or do I really need to like wrap my head around the why first? Like what are the concepts behind it before I even start trying to solve anything?
That's a really common dilemma, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think instinctively, most of us feel like the understanding the why should come first.
It just seems so logical, right?
It
Like
does.
you need that solid foundation to build on.
Precisely.
And that's exactly what we're going to be dipping into today because we're taking a deep dive into a paper that really challenges that assumption.
Oh, this is a good one. It really gets you thinking.
It does. It's called Not a One-Way Street: Bidirectional Relations Between Procedural and Conceptual Knowledge of Mathematics. And it's by Bethany Riddle Johnson, Michael Schneider, and John R. Starr.
Now, what they do in this paper is examine this popular idea that conceptual knowledge, like truly understanding the math concepts, has to precede procedural knowledge, which is knowing how to do the steps.
So that's the whole one-way street idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. One-way street from concepts to procedures.
But maybe it's not so simple. Maybe there's more back and forth than we realize.
Maybe it's a two-way street after all.
Now, before we get too far, let's just clarify what we're talking about here. When we say conceptual knowledge in math, what do we really mean?
Well, we're talking about understanding the abstract principles, right? The ideas behind the math, the concepts, the relationships between different operations, and how it all connects.
It's like getting the big picture, the why behind the calculation.
Exactly. And then procedural knowledge, that's more about knowing the specific steps, the sequence of actions you take to solve a problem.
Like the how-to guide, the recipe for getting the answer.
Precisely. Now, it's worth noting that sometimes these two types of knowledge have been distinguished based on how interconnected or rich the knowledge is. But the current thinking really focuses on the type of knowledge rather than the quality.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really explore the evidence and see how these two kinds of knowledge actually interact.
We want to see how they influence each other.
Yeah, and figure out if there's really solid proof that teaching or learning in a specific order, like starting with concepts, is actually better.
You know, it's fascinating because this debate about the relationship between conceptual and procedural knowledge isn't new at all.
Really?
The paper takes us all the way back to 1981 to a piece by Resnick and Ford.
Wow.
They were already talking about the connection between computational skills, so like being good at calculations and really understanding the math behind those calculations.
So they were already grappling with this how versus why question back then.
Exactly. And then you have Judith Sauter in 1998, who really hit the nail on the head. She said the basic disagreement is about whether skill leads to understanding or understanding leads to skill.
It's like the chicken or the egg dilemma of math education.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this debate is still very much alive and kicking. Just a few years ago, in 2014, a panel of experts identified this challenge of helping students become fluent in math facts and skills while also developing their conceptual understanding as one of the big unanswered questions in math education.
So clearly this tension between the how and the why is still very relevant.
Absolutely. And it's influenced a lot of the thinking around math education, particularly here in the U.S., where there's been a real push towards emphasizing conceptual knowledge first.
You're talking about the whole reform movement in math education.
Exactly. Many of those efforts really focus on this idea of moving from understanding to being able to do it at the one-way street model.
And the paper specifically mentions the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, or NCTM.
A very influential organization in the world of math education.
They have this statement in their 2014 publication, Principles to Actions, that says, procedural fluency follows and builds on a foundation of conceptual understanding.
And the authors of the paper actually point out that the folks who wrote that report were very deliberate in their choice of words. It wasn't just a suggestion, it reflected a strong belief that mastering the procedures shouldn't be the starting point.
So this perspective really downplays the possibility that maybe learning the steps could actually help you understand the concepts better.
Right, it's a very linear view of how learning happens.
So what does the research actually say about how these two types of knowledge are related?
Well, there's a whole body of research that looks at longitudinal studies.
So they're following students over time.
Exactly, to see how these two types of knowledge develop and whether one consistently predicts the other. And what's really interesting is that these studies have found evidence suggesting that the relationship might not be so one-sided after all.
So tell me about some of these findings.
Well, one study looked at middle schoolers learning how to solve equations, and it found that both having a good grasp of the concepts and being skilled at the procedures predicted improvement in the other area.
Oh, so they kind of boosted each other.
Exactly. And what's even more remarkable is that the relationship was symmetrical. So being good at the how was just as likely to lead to better understanding of the why as the other way around.
That's a pretty powerful finding. It suggests that sometimes struggling through those practice problems might actually be a good way to deepen your understanding, not just about getting the right answer.
It is. And this isn't just something we see in older students. Research has also shown this kind of back and forth relationship in early math learning.
Really?
Yeah. Studies looking at how young children learn to count have found that understanding the concept of number and being able to count accurately develop together and influence each other.
So even with those foundational skills, it seems like the how and the why are intertwined.
Precisely. And the same goes for basic arithmetic like addition and subtraction. Studies show this bidirectional relationship between understanding the operation and being able to perform it.
So it's not just about memorizing the steps.
Not at all. It's about making those connections between the steps and the underlying concepts.
And this pattern seems to hold up across different areas of math.
It does. A study in 2010 looked at how 4th and 5th graders learn about fractions and found the same thing. Being good at the procedures for working with fractions in one year predicted better conceptual understanding the following year, and vice versa.
So those early procedural skills weren't just isolated, they were contributing to a deeper understanding later on.
Right, and there was even a study that linked 2nd graders' procedural fluency with whole numbers to their conceptual understanding of fractions 2 years later.
Wow, that's amazing. So maybe all that practice with basic math facts is laying a foundation for understanding more complex concepts down the line.
It could very well be. Now, the researchers do point out that individuals will have different strengths. Some might grasp the concepts more easily, while others might pick up the procedures more quickly. But the overall trend is that procedural knowledge is a reliable predictor of improvements in conceptual knowledge.
So those longitudinal studies give us a sense of how these two types of knowledge relate over time. But what about more immediate evidence? Like what happens when researchers actually try to influence one type of knowledge directly?
Well, that's where experimental studies come in. And these studies offer even more support for this idea of a bidirectional relationship.
Tell me about some of those studies.
There's a classic one from 1999 where researchers gave elementary school kids short lessons on either how to solve math problems involving equality or the underlying concept of equality.
So one group learned the procedures and the other group focused on the concepts.
Exactly, and the results were fascinating. Both types of lessons led to improvements in the other type of knowledge compared to a control group that didn't receive any instruction.
So learning the steps helped them understand the concept, and understanding the concept helped them apply the steps.
Precisely. It's like they were reinforcing each other.
So it really does seem like this whole idea of a one-way street is too simplistic.
It does. And there's another study from 2009 that looked at the way practice problems were organized. This study found that when arithmetic problems were presented in a way that emphasized the underlying concepts, students made greater gains in both procedural and conceptual knowledge.
So it's not just about drilling endless practice problems.
No, the way you practice matters, and connecting those procedures to the concepts seems to make a real difference.
It makes sense, right? If you're just blindly following steps without any understanding, it's not going to stick as well.
Exactly. And when you take all these findings from the longitudinal studies and the experimental studies together, it really strengthens the argument for a two-way relationship between procedural and conceptual knowledge.
Okay, so the evidence seems pretty clear that it's not just understanding leading to doing, but also doing contributing to understanding. But if that's the case, why is this belief that conceptual knowledge must come first so persistent?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the paper actually explores some possible reasons.
Let's hear them.
One possibility is that it just seems intuitively, right? To really understand something deeply, you kind of need to grasp the concepts first before you can effectively apply the procedures.
I guess that makes sense. It's like you need the blueprint before you can build the house.
Right. But the research suggests that it might not be as straightforward as that. Maybe you can start building and then refine the blueprint as you go.
Maybe it's more of an iterative process.
Exactly. And another factor might be the way we talk about these two types of knowledge. Historically, conceptual knowledge has often been described as being more richly connected and deep, while procedural knowledge has been seen as more superficial and isolated.
So the language itself might be reinforcing this hierarchy.
It could be. And then there's the whole issue of procedural fluency, which sometimes just refers to being fast and accurate without necessarily implying understanding.
Right. You can be really good at following the steps without actually knowing why they work.
Exactly. And this can make it seem like procedural knowledge is less valuable or that it shouldn't be emphasized early on.
Like it's just rote memorization without real understanding.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the authors also suggest that there might be a historical context at play, particularly in the U.S. There's been a reaction against older teaching methods that focused heavily on drills and memorization without much attention to conceptual understanding.
Like the fear of going back to those bad old days of math education.
Right. So there's a concern that emphasizing procedural knowledge early on might be seen as a step backward.
So it's almost a pendulum swing in the opposite direction.
It could be. And what's really interesting is that this strong debate about the directionality of the relationship between conceptual and procedural knowledge seems to be more prevalent in the U.S. and some other Western cultures.
Right.
In many Asian countries, for example, praxis is often seen as a pathway to understanding.
So they see the doing as a way to get to the understanding.
Exactly. It's a different cultural perspective on how learning happens. The authors even mention that when they've talked to math education researchers from other countries, some are a bit puzzled by this intense debate in the U.S. about which comes first.
That's fascinating. It really shows how our cultural background can shape our views on education.
It does.
Yeah.
So you've got this combination of factors. The intuitive appeal of concepts first, the language we use, historical context, and cultural influences that might all contribute to this persistent belief that conceptual knowledge must precede procedural knowledge.
But as we've seen, the research doesn't really support that claim.
Not definitively.
Ah,
There's actually very little research that directly compares a concepts-first approach to a procedures-first approach, or even other approaches like iterative learning, where you alternate between concepts and procedures.
so the jury's still out on the best way to sequence instruction.
It is. And the authors conclude that we really need more research in this area to figure out what works best for different students and different topics.
So to sum up, what's the main takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the big takeaway is that the relationship between understanding math concepts and being able to do the procedures is more complex and dynamic than we might have thought.
It's not a one-way street, but a two-way street.
Precisely. They both influence each other and support each other's development.
And while it might feel intuitive to prioritize conceptual understanding, that might not always be the most effective approach.
There might be other ways to learn that work just as well, or even better, like integrating concepts and procedures from the start, or even starting with some procedural exploration.
So it's really about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. And I think it's worth reflecting on your own learning experiences.
Yeah. Have you ever found that diving in and trying to do something helped you understand it better later on?
Or maybe you had a moment where a concept suddenly clicked after you'd been practicing the procedures for a while.
It's interesting to think about how those two types of knowledge have interacted in your own learning journey.
And maybe recognizing this bidirectional relationship can help you approach learning new things with a more open mind.
Maybe it encourages you to experiment with different strategies and see what works best for you.
Exactly. And if you're interested in exploring this topic further, the researchers suggest looking into more studies on instructional sequencing in math.
You might find some fascinating research on iterative learning approaches, or even how different cultures approach math education.
There's a whole world of knowledge out there waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, the journey to understanding is rarely a straight line. It's full of twists, turns, and unexpected connections.